y'all? Mr. Zoo Nation, aka Savage Farmer Jones Giraffe, and welcome to another video. We're going to be talking about Palworld and Palworld accessories. Alright, so I basically wanted to give my first impression on Palworld as far as like the TCG goes, because like we're supposed to be getting like the official release like later on this month. Well, actually, not even later on this month, the end of this month actually. And either by the time this video goes up, either 1.0 in the actual game is going to be out, or it's going to be out on the same day. But anyway, regardless, Power World's, basically becoming a bigger thing. I was actually surprised that out of all people who picked up the card game, it was Bushiroad. But at the same time, I want to see how far this card game actually goes. But we're gonna talk about that like when we cross that bridge. But I wanted to give my first impression, right? Because I played this like around the time I did BCS California. And I didn't get a chance to really make a first impression video because I wanted to like basically simmer in, and I was basically on a huge debate on whether or not I actually wanted to like go forward with this as like an actual card game. But after consideration, I'm kind of curious to see how far this card game goes, so I'm very interested. Now, I'm going to basically lay out like a couple of things, right? The main thing is I've never actually played the actual Palworld. And the reason being is because by the time this game came out, I didn't have a good enough PC. And I was still with my PS4, not a PS5. So I didn't have like a good enough PC at the time to really play it. But by the time I did, that's when the lawsuit started happening. So I was under the impression that the card game, that like the game in general was just going to lose to Sue Happy Nintendo. And then apparently they won against Sue Happy Nintendo. And judging by like the new pals that came out, they are rubbing that in their face. But I do plan on to actually play like the actual game. But still the card game overall, I think is actually pretty interesting. So let's talk about it for a bit, right? My first impression of the card game is it kind of feels like it's a combination of a couple of things. It looks like it has like a hardware of Ice, because there's like a lot of elements to White Swords that I've also noticed. But then it also has like a software to pretty much like any card game that is using, mana as like a secondary deck, kind of like how One Piece uses Dons, or Gundam uses resources, or Riftbound uses the little jewel things. Like, it's been a while since I like looked at Riftbound, so I'm not going to correct myself right now. But anyway, it does have like a lot of elements that I've noticed when it comes to like Weiss. And basically, I'll scroll down a little bit. You'll see like how it says like the main deck and the soul deck. So the soul deck would basically be like kind of similar to like Dawn in One Piece, right? You get like X amount during each turns, and then you basically tap it to use, for mana and everything else like that. But then you have your PAL cards, which is self-explanatory. They're your creatures. Gear cards are kind of be like artifacts in Magic, where it kind of feels more like the equipment in Magic, but that's just me. The event cards will kind of be like the instants and sorceries that also exist in Magic. And structure cards is kind of like field spells in a way. Not 100%, but that's kind of like the best way I can describe it if I was compared to another card game. But yeah, outside of that, everything else kind of seems, up par. And here's the reason why I kind of see sound like saying that it feels like a little bit like Weiss, right? Because it goes over like a life counter system, right? So you have like 10 life points, and then right after that, you basically win the game. But the way you do damage is you see like where it says like strike, so it says like the amount of damage that will be dealt to the player when a pal attacks an opponent player. You know, basically like whatever damage you do kind of like a damage check thing. So like let's say that the pal does like 3 damage. You check the top 3 cards of the thing, and then if everything goes through, that's how much damage your opponent is actually going to take. But then they have these things called like lucky pals. So like you see where it has like the little rainbow thing on top. This will be kind of sort of similar to climaxes in Weiss. So like again, if you're doing 3 damage, and let's say like the second card is kind of sort of like this, then like the entire damage is canceled and everything. And then of course, yeah, right here it says like when you win, when your opponent's life goes to 0. But yeah, pretty much that's what it kind of like reminds me of in a way. And then of course, you know, Weiss being one of the only few card games where like the first turn player can actually attack, you can also do that with your pal. You can play a pal, you can actually attack first and everything else like that. But of course, because the way defense work in the game, if your pal is at rest, that means you can't use them for defense later. So it's kind of one of those things where like, okay, do you want to go super aggro like on turn 1, or do you want to risk like losing your pal to like your opponent attacking your pal or whatever, or risk you getting hit in the process pretty much. So it's a little like back and forth that basically happens like in the game and everything. Now outside of that, everything just seems pretty straightforward. I was able to do one game and kind of learn, you know, a lot of the things that you could possibly do like in the game whatsoever. Then they also surprisingly have like hand traps, aka like their version of, if this was like Vanguard, it will be like their version of perfect guards, where it's basically like interrupts, where you can nullify like the attack, right? So before like even, you know, damage happens, you can basically like use the card and like tap one of your soul in order to do it. The one that they give in the demo deck, I don't know if this is going to be every card, because the next video I'm going to be going over like the overall card list. But like essentially, it also has like a way where you can discard, you know, that card and another card in your hand, or you can just pay the 1 soul and discard the card in general in order for you to use it. So that's kind of something to look forward to as well. Then one of the other interesting things that I've like noticed is like the structures itself. So like you see where it says like where you can assign like a pal to a structure, where you by resting the pal you can turn a card sideways. Then they can be put to work as structures. So one of the interesting things that I've noticed is it's not on this particular thing, but it also comes in the demo deck. There's a card that basically is a lucky pal, and it says like discard a card from your hand, and then you can like stand it, right? So essentially what I've noticed is like, what I noticed as I was like looking at the card, I was like, what happens if I play that pal, basically put it in the structure so it'll rest itself, and then use the effect in order to, you know, discard a card in order to restand it. The funny thing is, like, the structure that's showing right now, I can't necessarily like zoom into it, but essentially like the effect is you rest the pal and draw cards. You can kind of sort of like, let's say like that particular pal survives a turn, right? Essentially what you can do is discard a card. Like basically you can rest them to draw a card, and then you can discard a card in order to restand them in order for him to attack again. I'm all like, yo, that's kind of spicy. I'm not even gonna hold you on it. Obviously it's kind of like a weird like netting at the end of the like hand netting at the end of the day, but still I think it's actually like pretty interesting, like me figuring out just by looking at the two cards. So it's not that hard. It doesn't look like it'll be a pretty hard card game to actually like pick up and everything. But outside of that, there is a few concerns that I do have for the card game in general. So the first one is how much everything is going to cost, because not everybody has a lot of money to basically invest into another card game, which is always going to be the major like number one question when it comes down to a new card game coming out. As I stated like in previous videos, one of the major things that I don't like about Bandai is how whenever they come out with a new card game, they always screw like the player base over with the supply and demand. So when it first comes out, it's pretty hard for anybody to get into the card game if they weren't like the first people there. Obviously you got scalpers that also messes up the secondary market as well, but that's kind of like one of the major things that is like concerning about looking at this card game in general, but that's just me. On the other hand, I don't really see a lot of people talking about the card game either, or at least like outside of Bushiroad spaces, I should say. And it's not one of those things where I kind of fear that like the card game is not really going to, get a lot of eyes onto it. But like compared to like how last year when Gundam was coming out and Riftbound was coming out, there was a lot of eyes on both of those card games. Now of course you can make the argument that it's because of how popular Gundam is and how popular League of Legends is. Like they have like the fan play base and the player base in order to instantly gain fans just off of rep alone. But Palworld isn't, well, it can't really compare to Gundam in League of Legends, but it's popular enough to really have enough eyes on the card game in general. But the other thing that I've also kind of have to put into realization is it's a Bushiroad card game. And from a lot of TCG player eyes, when it comes to Bushiroad card games, looking from the outside in, a lot of people don't like Bushiroad card games because they believe that it's all luck, no skill. And when you look at something like, let's say, Vanguard or Weiss, it's a little bit understandable. You look at the trigger system in Vanguard, and you can kind of see, where everybody's coming from, especially when it comes with the over trigger. And the same thing goes with climaxes, and it's the same thing goes to climaxes in Weiss as well. So when you put all that into consideration, it's a little bit understandable that people will be skeptical of looking at, of wanting to pick up this game. But with all that being said, that's my first impressions of it. Hope everybody likes, comments, subscribe. But my name is Mr. Super Nation, aka Savage Armor Jones Rafa, signing out. Yo.